Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to our weekly Meet the Artist talk. My name is Tommy Hensel, and I am the director of the Fine and Performing Arts Center at Moraine Valley Community College. Moraine Valley is located in Palos Hills, Illinois, just outside of Chicago. We're a southwest suburb of Chicago. So, of course, during these last few months, like many theaters, like all theaters, as a matter of fact, we've been closed. So we haven't been able to show you any live performances. And because we don't have access to our actual physical stage, we can't do a live stream of a performance right now. Hopefully we'll move in that direction in the fall. But we thought about it for a while and thought, how can we reach out to our audience, to our friends, to our employees, to people at the college, to all of our patrons, and keep something out there for people to enjoy. So I've reached out to a number of my friends who are artists who have appeared on our stage in the past several years and asked them if they might be willing to join me for a conversation on a Tuesday night. So every Tuesday at 7 o'clock Central, there's an artist who has appeared on our stage who sits down from wherever they are, and we have a conversation. And in full disclosure, I'm only picking people that I really like and I want to talk to who are friends of mine. So as I said, in a couple of weeks in a row, it's kind of like I'm having a private conversation and you're all voyeurs watching my conversation with a friend. But hopefully you'll put some interesting questions in the chat and the comments, and we'll be able to get to those. And I'm hoping that everybody is having a good time. As you're watching this, of course, it's on both Facebook and YouTube. Once the video is done, we're usually at about an hour. It stays up on YouTube for a while, so you can actually go back and watch any of the videos that you have missed. So tonight, I am thrilled to have one of my best friends in the industry and a marvelous human being, as well as an incredibly talented person, my great friend, Joshua Kane. Hey.
Hello. Hey.
So how are you, Joshua?
It has been a fascinating time, Tommy.
Gosh, tell me about it.
Here in New York City, it doesn't feel like New York City. I walk down the Times Square, I see less than 40 people. Mm-hmm. We're still in the midst of coming out of the lockdown. We just entered phase 3 in New York City, which means that outdoor dining has started. We're not going back to indoor dining yet. Mm-hmm. Stores are permitting you to come in small groups. Everybody looks like they're wearing a mask, and we're all following good protocols to keep the things down, and it's good. We're making progress here.
Yeah, we're like slightly ahead of you in phases here in Illinois, because you're calling from New York City. I'm in Berwyn, which is a western suburb of Chicago. But I personally am still kind of in phase 2.5. So I'm just sort of letting it go, and I'm waiting. I want to go out, but I'm just not doing it yet.
Well, it's hard for me because, theater to me, going to the theater to me is probably more important to me even than performing on stage. I love being in an audience more than I do being in front of one.
Yeah.
Going to the theater, I'm sort of an evangelical for the arts. Mm-hmm. And I go to theater with my family the way other people go to church or synagogue or public meeting. And we love it because we go to hear fabulous stories told. We are in the room with like-minded, interesting people. And at the end of the show, we get to have conversations with people we've never met before, and we may never meet again. But then we have profound thoughts and seeds planted, which continue to grow throughout the rest of the year and years. I mean, I've been taking my son, Zachariah, to approximately 40 to 85 shows a year on average. And this means that his head is full of stories. And I'm concerned that with this kind of lockdown, it's not just the social aspect of a kid not being able to play with his friends or us being able to see our friends. It's what does it do to us not being in public, sharing and breathing stories together?
Yep. And that's something I talk to people all the time about. And I say this from the stage sometimes when I do a curtain speech before a show is, the reason that we do what we do is not to become super wealthy, because that's not going to happen. It's because we have the passion for it. And part of the passion is this power of live performance, where a bunch of people who don't know each other all come together and have a shared experience, so they then know each other. They now, even if they didn't talk to everybody in the auditorium, they've all shared something. So on some level, they're now part of a new tribe. And I feel like that's what's important about live performance. And so I agree with you. We're all waiting with bated breath for the ability to be able to have open theaters again for that.
There's a extraordinary feeling in being in a theater, as I said, with people you don't know, a theater in the round, let's say, or three-quarter round, like the Tom Patterson in Stratford, Ontario. And I remember many times being in the theater, looking across the stage and seeing somebody having a delightful time across the way and knowing that I'm going to have to meet them at the intermission because we were clearly enjoying the same things to such an extent that we were very kindred spirits in the Anne of Green Gables kind of way.
Yeah.
And there's something about coming to live events and the ephemerality, and when those pennies drop and those connections happen, it becomes very Muppet Movie, where we discover old friends we haven't met yet. Not just the people on the stage, but the people who are like-minded enough to have chosen to come and be in the audience together, because people do have the choices. They could stay at home and watch television or be on YouTube or Facebook or their devices or at a sports game. But there's something really special about the way people come together for this. And I'm grateful for the support that people have given us before. And I know they're hungry to be out with us again.
Yep. For anybody who's watching this, who's never been to a show in the theater in the round, there's not that many of them left, sadly, but boy, do it if you haven't. I was very lucky in graduate school because we had multiple theaters and one of them was a theater in the round. So we were required as directing students and acting students to perform and direct in that space at least once, if not more. And so it's a transformational experience as a performer and a director, but certainly for an audience as well, because the audience is all watching each other as much as they're watching the show. It's actually kind of fun.
It's funny, the last show that I went to see before the shutdown, I was getting ready to leave town to go up and do my final performance up in Buffalo, which I'll talk to you about in a moment. But right before that, a friend of mine, his daughter was performing in Pippin at the Professional Art School in New York. It's a public school where they train the kids for Broadway, and they were doing Pippin. And I love that show. And this was going to be a dazzling show, and his daughter was playing Catherine. Mm-hmm. And we went to it, and we were aware as we were crowding in the cafeteria, waiting to go in, that this might not be the smartest idea social distancing wise, that we were all a little bit closer together than we expected because we thought the show was starting at 8. It didn't start till about 8:25. So we were closer together. But as we went in, we were all very conscious that this may be the last show that we were all going to see for 3 months, 6 months, or a year. Mm-hmm. And these kids did a quality of show which was sacred. I mean, there was a covenant made that night that there was a future for theater because there were these brilliant young people trained and performing at a Broadway level, giving their hearts out. And they were aware this was probably one of the last shows they were going to get to do or see. It only got to run for 2 nights before it was shut down by the governor. Mm-hmm. And I was aware that Broadway was going to be shut because, shows like Come From Away and others where many people were ill already and trying to keep the show going on. But you had to wait for the governor to declare force majeure before people could collect their insurance.
Sure.
And there was something sacred about being there for that final day of theater. And then the next morning I was getting ready to fly out for Buffalo, and I called up one of our colleagues, and because I realized that I was in the midst of the hot spot being in New York City. But I was going up to Buffalo where there was not even 1 case registered. So I could be patient 0 going to Buffalo.
Yeah.
And my presenter, God bless him, was eager to perform. I mean, wonderful gentleman, one of the real stalwarts of the theater, old guard captain, Jefferson Westwood. And I called up one of our mutual friends, James O'Connell. Mm-hmm. And I called him at probably about 5:30 in the morning, Wisconsin time, pretending that I thought it was 2 hours ahead, not an hour behind. And he goes, "What is it?" And I said, "Jim, I'm performing tomorrow." He goes, "Yes, for Jefferson." I said, "Jim, I'm doing the mind reading show. I shake the hands of about 42 people on that show." And he goes, "Oh my God, we're going to talk about force majeure." And I said, "Yeah, and ethics." Mm-hmm. So he had me call in and join a class of presenters that he was training for the next generation to talk about what our responsibilities were to the audience, to the presenter, to each other, to myself as an actor traveling. And we determined that the plane was going to be relatively empty at that point. And I'd be safer in Buffalo than I would be in New York. So it really was up to Jefferson. And Jefferson said, well, the governor has declared we can only do 50% of the House in spaces under 500. We've got you in the black box. We're going to limit it to 100 seats. Anyone who's not feeling safe, they're not going to come. Surprisingly, they had last-minute calls coming from people as far away as Pittsburgh who were aware this was probably going to be one of the last shows they were going to see. Mm-hmm. And they came in, everybody got their playbill, a handful of Purell. We acknowledged it once during the show that we were aware of what was going on, and the show went forward.
Good.
But that was the last performance that I've done since March 13th.
Well, it makes sense, because I think that's about when we were closing things down here. So, yep. Yeah. So we're watching. We're going to get there. So one of the things I want to I've been asking, it seems like a standard question, and I know it's kind of a standard interview question, but I kind of like it, is sort of looking back in time to where it all started for you as far as your connection to the theater, because everybody has kind of a different story of when they first realized that either music or theater or whatever was something that they were passionate about. So I would love to know your story. Like, where did you know this is what I want to do?
Well, I was always a book kid. If you gave me a choice between books and people, I would always take books, because I could open the magic doorway, go into a book, and disappear.
Me too.
And I would read 3 to 6 books a day. I mean, in school, they didn't even bother trying to teach me math or science in the early grades. They just let me sit beside the bookcase and read my way through. And I had the same teacher, Judy Hall, for 2nd and 3rd grade. And in 2nd grade, I read my way through all of the books in the bookcase marked boys. And in 3rd grade, I read my way through all of the books in the bookcase marked girls. And yeah, it's crazy, but they had it divided like that back then.
No, we're the same age. I get it. They did.
So at that time, they were doing school integration. I grew up in Westport, Connecticut, which at the time was not the rich community that it is now. It's a place where artists and actors and writers went to live. I used to weed Ava Le Gallienne's lawn when I was
Oh my gosh.
Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward lived there, but they didn't have a lot of money when they first moved in. I used to, P.D. Eastman lived up the block. I mean, it was, Peter Straub was there for a while. It was writers, it was artists, it was actors. It was a fabulous environment. And our school decided to integrate with Bridgeport, Connecticut, which was where the Clockworks Factory and P.T. Barnum were from. Mm-hmm. And so Mrs. Uddyback decided to do a musical of the life of Marian Anderson.
Oh, okay.
The great black opera singer.
Yeah.
And I got to play the role of Billy Boy in that, who was one of her friends. Now, what was funny in this school, in this, it's amazing in this age of Black Lives Matter and realizations, the things that we did wrong that were done during that time. A white girl played the role of Marian Anderson.
Oh.
Exactly. A black girl played her teacher, who was a white woman, in the actual story. Mm-hmm. Without realizing it, we weren't doing color blind casting, because it was black and white students both throughout the play, but playing different roles than they might have. Mm-hmm. It was cast for the talents and the abilities. We ended up doing what Peter Brook would have called a color-rich production. Peter Brook doesn't believe in color blind casting, because he says that disavows the value of everybody.
Yeah.
Color rich is when you recognize the potential of everyone, mm-hmm. and you add to things on stage. But that was my first time on stage, was in that production. And around that same time, I saw my cousin Eric White's fabulous actor play the role of the Artful Dodger in a production of Oliver the Musical. Mm-hmm. And I was blown away. I mean, first of all, that was my cousin, but I didn't believe it was my cousin. That was the Artful Dodger. And I was completely transported away. And around that time, I started taking an interest in the other art forms as well. First of all, in my family, theater was acceptable. My grandmother was Vera Bacall, Lauren Bacall's aunt.
Oh, okay.
Lauren Bacall took her name from my grandfather, Jack Bacall. My mother in the book is referred to as one of the 2 darling babies. On the other side of the family, we have Bruce Whites, who was in Hill Street Blues, and my other cousin, Eric Whites. So theater was acceptable. Mm-hmm. But I also took an interest in the circus arts. So I was learning juggling and fire eating. I learned fire eating when I was about 12.
Oh, my Lord.
And my mother, amazing woman, it's my parents were divorced when I was very young, and Mom was very permissive about things. And so she had no problems with my fire reading. Once she found out I wasn't getting hurt, she called the neighbors over to watch.
Okay.
I took an interest in pantomime, which may be surprising considering I make most of my living speaking now. But when I was young, I was tongue-tied. I stuttered a bit, and my voice wasn't free and resilient and resounding. That took years of study in schools to get there. So I studied mime, and I came into the city, and I worked with teachers like Moni Jakim and Stefan Nijelowski, the famous Polish mime. And in 1983, I got to study with Marcel Marceau, the Grand Master of Mime himself.
Yeah.
And theater was always going to be part of my life. That was clear. And I was one of the first 4 freshmen who went to Emerson College's BFA program for the Bachelor of Fine Arts. But I only lasted there a few months. I didn't have the, I wasn't in the right place to do college at that point. I was too single-minded, perhaps too narrow-minded, we might even say. My thoughts were entirely on the theater. I didn't understand the value of a liberal arts education. So I came back home and I went to study with Stella Adler and Bobby Lewis, Marcel Marceau I mentioned, and eventually I moved over to the National Shakespeare Conservatory. And after I had my training, I realized I had an actor's technique, but I didn't know enough to actually be of value to the industry. It wasn't as interesting as I needed to be. So I went to the University of Bridgeport and I got a double major in English and history.
Okay.
And I took all of my courses based on whichever class had the most books. So one class was the complete Brontes.
Well, there you go.
The complete Melville. And I lined up all of my history courses with my literature courses. And at the same time, I then studied courses in advertising, business law, sight singing, many other courses which then helped to support my career as a self-represented artist in today's market, in today's world. So the theater has always been part of what I've been fascinated with. And growing up in Westport, we had the Westport Country Playhouse. And that afforded me incredible opportunities because from a very young age, I could either get a student ticket or when I was about 15 years old, I could start ushering. And when you ushered, you got to see the show for free.
Yeah.
And being not far from New York, I could take the train in. And my mom let me start doing that when I was around 13. So I would take the train in by myself to New York City. I mean, it's just crazy when you think about it.
Yeah.
And I would second act shows. Now, what that means is I couldn't afford to buy tickets to a Broadway show, so I would go out to the trash can near the theater. I would find a playbill. And then when the intermission came out, I would walk back in with people holding up my playbill as if I was already at the show. And I would then walk in, stand in the back till I saw an empty seat, and then I would rush down and sit in it. Now, this was hard in shows which were only 2 acts. I didn't always know what was going on unless it was a classic which I'd read. But fortunately, there were a lot of Eugene O'Neill revivals at that time, and those were 3 and 4 acts long.
Oh, yeah.
So it gave me great opportunity to see a lot of theater. And then that was a big part of it.
Cool. Yeah. So, I think it's interesting, I think more students would benefit from knowing when it's time to go to college and when it's not. You know what I mean? I think there was this stigma when I was growing up that, when you graduate from high school, you go immediately to college. Yeah. And for many people, that's great. And it worked for me. But for other people, I think taking that time to do other things first and really get your brain so you're not just flailing around, spending money on courses that mean nothing to you. And I also think, in part of your story, which I think anybody watching who is a performer or who knows a young performer, please study business and please study the practical bare bones of how to be in this industry, because unless you're going to immediately go out and find an agent, but even then you have to know how the business works. You need to know how to represent yourself. How do you present yourself? How do you market yourself? You're selling you, and what better thing to sell, but you have to know how to do it.
Yeah. And the funny thing is, I don't think we're taught the right things.
No,
I think the focuses are wrong. the values of what we are taught to regard as important. Talent is not as important as being good to work with.
Yeah.
Bottom line is, being a good human being is the most important thing to have at the top of your resume.
Yep.
No matter how much talent somebody has, nobody wants to work with somebody who's difficult. We want to work with people who are kind and easy and considerate.
Yep.
It doesn't help to have people who make waves and make things difficult, unless they're the right kind of waves at the right time.
Yeah.
But it's those weren't the focuses when I was going to school. It was always about, developing yourself, your talent, and your presence, rather than how can you be useful? How can you be the solution to a problem?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing. When you're being cast, that's the big thing, is they're looking for you to be the solution for a problem they don't know the answer for.
Yep. And one of my friends in the industry has always said that one of his early mentors said to him, be the person that you want to work with. And also what's really interesting is early in my career, I had to learn this stuff on the job, like so many people do. I had a mentor, and I don't know if my friend Valerie is watching tonight, but she worked with me at the Lost Colony outdoor drama on the coast.
Oh my God.
And I did 6 years at the Lost Colony. So I did almost 500 performances of that show. But the musical director at the time was an amazing woman named Rosalind McAnulty. And about 3 or 4 years into my tenure there, I was directing their second stage. So I was in charge of the shows that went on after the big show. So I did go to some of the big unified auditions, and I was sitting in an audition with Roz, watching performers, and they come across, and those big auditions, you have 2 minutes, and there's literally 1,000 people audition in 2 days. So they come out, they say their name, they do a piece of a monologue, they sing a teeny bit, and then they walk across the stage. It's like they're called cattle calls. And this one actor came out and was brilliant. I mean, stunning. And Roz looked at the resume and said, oh, he's worked with you before, because my name was on his resume because I had directed him. And I said, yeah. She goes, he would be great. And she mentioned the name of a role in one of the shows. And I said, yeah, he's probably one of the most talented people I've ever worked with. He's a bit of a pain in the butt to work with. And she went, oh, and she took his resume and threw it into the out pile. And I went, wait, don't you want to call him back? And she goes, Tommy, I'm going to teach you something. I said, what? She said, talent is a cheap commodity. She goes, talent will get you cast the first time, but not the second time if you worked with me and I didn't like working with you. She goes, so there's plenty of talented people out there who can do that role. I'm not going to work with somebody who you tell me is a jerk. And I was like, well, okay, done. Thanks, Roz.
No, it's there's truth there. I remember those SETC auditions is what they were called.
Oh yeah, and this was SETC.
That was the Southeast Theater Conference. I remember those. People used to talk about a guardian angel on your shoulder.
Mm-hmm.
If we are fortunate, we have friends who are willing to tell us the truth when we're screwing up.
Yeah.
And many years ago, when I had come into the market as a self-represented solo theater artist, my show was recognized as very strong. The work was well received. I was getting bookings. And then one day I got a call from one of my mentors. And it was at a time when life was pretty low. And there were some things going on in my life that were pretty hard. And he said to me, are you about as far down as you can get right now? And I said, yeah. And this was right after my son Max had passed away. You may remember Max when he was 2 years old. He died of the flu. And Jim said to me, he goes, well, if you're at your bottom, I'd like to talk to you about a couple of things. I said, okay.
Oh no.
He goes, when you were here for your residency, we had some problems you may not have been aware of. You know how you insisted on that stool being 30 inches? Yeah. He goes, wouldn't 28 have done just as well? And I started to try justifying myself. And Jim goes, if it's so important to have the stool at 30 inches, carry rubber attachment pieces that you can have put on it, or send your own stool. He goes, it created problems that day. He goes, you have a choice right now to make. You can either continue on the path you're on right now and burn out what could be a really good career, because he liked what I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
He goes, but if you're a pain in the ass, no one's going to work with you. Or he goes, you can make just a couple of adjustments, small ones.
Mm-hmm.
If you make those tiny adjustments, you can have a long-term career and be of good use to this industry for many years. And that talk was given to me about 15 years ago. Wow. And thanks to Jim and Charles and a couple of others, Michael Goldberg and others intervening at the right time and swatting me upside the head when needed, I'm still here.
So I have to say, for people watching who aren't aware of how contracts work, whenever we hire a performer, there's always the legal pieces of the contract, but there's a piece of the contract called a rider that includes what the artist wants, whether it's like what type of hotel or what kind of food. And I have to tell you that Joshua has my favorite clause ever written into an artist rider. It's your board game clause. Tell us about that.
Okay, well, let me tell you how it came about. I was part of the Leadership Fellows program for the Arts Presenters Organization, APAP, which is a training program to help develop more woke people in the industry who are going to be able to increase the diversity and potential for a wide range of artists and leaders in the organization and in the world, using our white privilege to take things forward, as we should, because we have the light, we should use it to illuminate others. Well, we had to have a project, and part of my project at that time, a personal project, was to find a way to do the business of our business in 1 to 2 days maximum per week, because I wasn't happy doing the business.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, okay, I've identified a problem. Am I doing the right project? I realized the project was wrongheaded. I shouldn't learn how to do the business in just 2 days. I had to find a way to fall in love with doing the business again, and with the people in it.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized I was letting the off-key voices in the choir dominate my experience. That I was hearing the people who were not pleasant to work with too loudly, and their effect on me was too strong. So I put in a no bleep person in the contract. I didn't want to work with certain kinds of personalities, but I won't use that language because we're on Moraine Valley's feed.
Yeah, thank you.
It was my no bleep clause, and we called it the board game clause. And the board game clause is simple. And I tested this out at the Arts Midwest Conference, where Tommy and I first met many years ago. And I announced it, that we had a new clause, and I had it on my banner: ask about the new clause before booking me. And the clause states, presenter agrees to provide a minimum of 3 entertaining people for artists to play board games with post-show. And that was it. I wasn't asking for a bottle of bourbon. I wasn't asking for 3 chickens or a bunny or anything wacky, no green M&Ms. But this was, to a certain extent, to find out what kind of people I was working with. And there were 3 reactions that I got initially to that clause. First reaction was, well, we don't even eat with the artist. To which I said, and that's why we've never worked together, to that presenter. Strangely enough, I ended up working with him 3 years later, and he signed off on the clause, and we were good.
Yeah.
But it took time before he would embrace that clause. Second reaction was, my stagehands just heard you talking about this on the phone and want to know if you play Cards Against Humanity.
Which you do.
And I said, absolutely. And he said, well, then I've just been told to book your show. And I said, okay. He goes, what do you do? I had to tell him what the shows were, because now his stagehands wanted the experience of having that kind of connectivity, because it said to them, I cared enough about them as people to want to spend time and not be a prima donna, that I realized that without the lighting people, I'm doing radio, and without the sound people, I'm doing mime. That it takes a whole bunch of us to put together a one-person show. And the third reaction were development people who said, can I sell that as a sponsorship opportunity? To which I said, you want to provide expensive hors d'oeuvres for me to sit with your high donors and play games? I'm fine with that. Because I realized I was too old to sit around in my boxer shorts in a hotel room eating Taco Bell, watching cable news after a show. It was depressing. I needed the human contact.
Yeah.
I needed the experience of coming off of that adrenaline high of performing and getting through the PPD, post-performance depression.
Yeah.
It happens when you come off the adrenaline, but with other people.
Yeah. And it's funny because when you were at my theater, we did play Cards Against Humanity. And I remember thinking that there were members of the crew who I didn't have a lot of interaction with normally, who probably learned a whole lot more about me than they ever thought they were going to learn, because that's probably one of the funniest games of all time. Oh my.
And I'm convinced if we'd had that recorded, you'd be out of a job right now.
Oh, dear God. Yes, we would. No. No doubt. I think all of us in that room would have been out of a job. So yeah, and I know Amanda is a backstage here right now. Amanda Hansen, who is our assistant technical director, and I think she was there in that game. So yeah, so she knows. But yeah, that's I always felt like that was one of my favorite things that I ever read in a writer, because you're right, what it said to me as a presenter, because I've toured, so I get it. I've been a performer touring, but it said to me, okay, this is a person who is reaching out in advance to tell us that they're not a diva, that they have things they need and things they want, and then there's some very specific things to make the show happen, but it's not all about me. It's about us, including the audience. So, I really like that, because, we've seen the total opposite of that too many times in our career.
And I wish I had that wisdom and that experience when I first came into the market. Because when I first came into the market in the 1990s, early 1990s, I thought it was about me and my show.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't realize that what my role was conduit and excuse. Conduit in the sense that when I'm performing shows like Gothic at Midnight, the show where I perform the works of Poe, Dickens, and Bierce, I am the pipeline between the author's words and the audience. I am not as important as either one. To a certain extent, I have to disappear to serve the text fully and to serve the audience. If I make it self-indulgent and about myself, that blocks it for the audience and screws over the author.
Yeah.
Doing Borders of the Mind, the psychic show for the whole family, that show is based on having genuine rapport with the audience. Most of it is psychologically based, and it comes about working because we've established a rapport.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's about me being the all-powerful thief of thoughts type personality, that doesn't work for me when I do the mentalism show. When Gary Lee and I put together that show, we decided there were too many mentalism shows with the guys with the headache poses and it being about them on stage. We realized that we were living in a time where people were their own disc jockeys with their iPods and their iTunes playlists, where people were blogging and telling their stories to thousands of people trying to reach out to the world. We were in a new renaissance of people creating things and messaging themselves into the world. So nobody was coming to the theater to get a deeper experience of me. They come to get a deeper experience of themselves. And it's up to you and I to set up the circumstances which permit the audiences to walk away feeling more expansive in the moment and more potentially expansive in who they can be as they continue the swelling of that bread rise, as the yeast of the performance continues to expand within them, because that goes on for days afterwards.
Yeah.
And I didn't know that when I came in. And I wish I had, because I think I wasted people's time and a lot of my own time. I was not focused on the right things. But as I said earlier, they don't teach us that in the schools or in our culture.
No.
It's like with the masks right now. If they had said that the masks are worn to protect you, to protect ourselves, everybody would be wearing a mask out there. But because it was said the mask is there to protect other people, not everybody is.
Yeah, and I'm not going to get into how cynical I'm feeling about humanity right now, but yeah, you're right. Now I want to go back. There's a couple of things that I don't generally prepare a lot of questions for these interviews, but there were two specific things I knew I wanted to ask you. One is, in your bio, you referenced growing up in an illegal boarding house. When I first read your bio, I thought that was like a fake bio, that you were just trying to get attention, but apparently it's not. So talk to me about the illegal boarding house.
Well, first of all, you got to know a little bit about my mom. My mom was a incredible lady. She grew up in New York City on the East Side, and she rode horses in Central Park and went to the Dalton School. Her mother was Vera Bacall, and her father died when she was at a very young age. And my grandmother married his best friend, Ira, who was his law partner as well. And we actually have a letter from Jack that said during World War II at one point, because they both served, if I don't come back, you marry Vera. Okay. There was already kind of an understanding there, and they were very close. But my mom was a really adventurous gal. She went into the projects and she tutored kids who needed help with their reading. She went to a ranch in Montana for several summers where she busted broncos and learned to become a crack shot at a rifle and in any Oakley style, to the point where she actually gave riflery lessons at the police academy, and was a better shot than my father, who also taught there. And I think I kind of intimidated him at times. She was an athlete. She could shoot a basket from 20 feet away and swish it right through. My parents were divorced when I was very young, and one day one of the neighbors, Cubby Welch, came over and said to my mom she needed to get a man around the house because otherwise I was going to grow up very wimpy, which I guess was his issue. And she said, well, what do we need a man here for? She goes, well, who's going to teach him sports? And she said, do you play basketball? And he said, yeah. And she goes, I'll tell you what, first person to get 10 points. And she cleaned his clock, left him winless. It was beautiful. And Mom was, raising us during the recession. I think you may recall that time. And
yeah,
it was really hard financially, and Dad wasn't making his payments for the alimony, and Mom was working as a realtor when she could, but there wasn't a lot of economy.
No.
And things were getting kind of dim and dark, and one night we said goodnight to each other, and my sister Robin said, Mom, we just said goodnight. It's only 5:30. This isn't right. And we realized, one, we needed to have other people in our home to interact with.
Mm-hmm.
We needed the human contact. But we also needed the economy. So Mom opened up the house and started renting rooms. And the people who came to live with us over the years ranged from superintendent of schools, a postman who was moonlighting as a policeman, 2 French girls who had overstayed their visa, a gentleman who, when he came to us from Holland, we discovered 3 weeks after he left that the FBI was looking for him. When he came back to live with us the second time, he was working on a project for the CIA, which we had validated before we let him back in. Fascinating gentleman. We had all sorts of interesting people living in the house. And this meant that I grew up in a place with lots of people to talk to and bounce off of. And, I was a lonely kid, and definitely a kid looking for interactivity and people to connect with. So it was wonderful having these transient people come in and out of our lives. So it wasn't an illegal boarding house because we were not zoned for it.
Mm-hmm.
It turns out the neighbors thought we were running a brothel because of all of the cars that kept changing over in the driveway on a regular basis.
Yeah.
And they were relieved to find out it was only we were running a boarding house. And the interesting thing was that above the doorway of the house was this sign.
I love that sign.
Rooms for rent, no theatricals.
No theatricals.
This is the sign that I grew up under. The kid who was going to be a magician, a mime, a fire eater, a juggler, a classical actor, a narrator of books. This is what I was growing up under. Now, as you can imagine, I probably felt just a wee bit repressed. And I did. In Connecticut, I felt I was too loud, too Jewish, too theatrical, too everything. And I was tongue-tied much of the time. I was forced. I was into a box. I was never at ease in my body. I always retreated too far or pushed too far forward. Mm-hmm. I was never in balance. And I never trusted myself as to whether I was appropriate for the space that I was in. I was like a large dog in a china shop. The tail was just taking things down at the wrong times. So I lucked out because, eventually I moved to New York City because I met my fabulous wife, Abby. And Abby and I moved to New York, and, that's a whole story to itself. But in New York, I wasn't too loud. I wasn't too theatrical. No. I certainly wasn't too Jewish. I wasn't too anything. And wonderful thing about New York is nobody really pays any attention to me in those ways. In New York, it's a world city.
Yeah.
I always tell people that I don't live in the United States. I live on the island of Manhattan, a small island off the coast of Europe. And I say that because with public transportation, you get into conversations with total strangers because of the books they're reading.
Oh, yeah.
There's a brief time where people were reading on Kindles and on their phones, but people realized it killed the number one conversation maker on the subways and the buses. Because your number one conversation opener in the city is you see somebody reading a book, you ask them if they like the book.
Yeah.
or what other books they've loved. And you get into conversations with total strangers. Hold on, something that was weird. We just had Siri just try joining in our conversation.
Oh my God. The other one, and I'm not going to say her name because she'll talk to me, occasionally will pop up and say something strange to me in my apartment as well. I'm sure that Big Brother is listening to me, but I don't really care because, either they're bored or they're highly entertained or something. I don't know. Exactly. I talk to myself. I live alone and I talk to myself out loud all the time. So.
But in New York City, we first moved to Brooklyn, and up in Brooklyn, the bagel guys, I remember the first time I walked in and I said, "I'd like a bagel with chive cream cheese." And the guy says, "What?" I said, "Oh, excuse me. I'll take a bagel with a schmear." "Oh, no problem." And, because, before I came to New York, I was very much about the performative side of my personality.
Yeah.
I mean, when my wife, when I first called her up for our first phone conversation, she didn't answer the phone and I got the answering machine. I left a message. She thought I was a radio announcer and that she had won something. She didn't know it was the booby prize. I mean, it was because back then I was very about this kind of sound. Mm-hmm. But living in New York taught me to be able to let go. There's something about a city and the wide streets and the tall buildings and the amount of people you interact with that teaches one to fit in differently and to share space in greater facility. So
the story about the answering machine actually leads me to the other question that I wanted to make sure I asked you was, you've talked about the Edgar Allan Poe types of stuff that you do, and you've talked about the borders of the mind, but one of the other pieces of your career is as a voiceover actor, and I would love to know, how did that happen? How did you get into the world of voiceover acting?
I was so lucky in my passions and some of the people I was connected to. When other kids were going out on dates, I was phenomenally shy. I was really shy. So around the ages of 14 through 17-ish or 18, I would go to the Museum of Television and Radio, and I would listen to old radio broadcasts of people like Orson Welles and Vincent Price and Mel Blanc, and other people were dating girls, and I was listening to the old voices, and I fell in love with the old radio dramas and shows. And I was one of those people who would turn up the commercial when people like Jackson Beck came on, and he was the voice of, it's a bird, it's a plane, it's Superman, and one of the classic voices of television. And my uncle was in advertising. My uncle was Joe Bacall, again, that Bacall name. And he had a company called Sunbow Productions and an ad agency called Griffin Bacall. And he took toys from like G.I. Joe, and he turned them into cartoons to sell them.
Oh, okay.
And before that, when he was just doing ad work for Benton and Bowles, I used to go and spend a day with my uncle. It was the biggest thrill in the world. And I'd go to the recording studio with him, and I got to see Mel Blanc, voice of Bugs Bunny.
Yeah.
Record live. But the coolest day was, I went in and I was probably about 16, 17, and Jackson Beck was recording. It was the second or third time I'd seen Jackson Beck record. And they were having a lull. The producer had to step out and get some different copy. And Jackson called me into the booth, and he said, "This is my stopwatch." He goes, "You need to learn 60, 30, 15, and 10. I said, "Why?" He goes, "Because you should be able to look at any piece of copy and be able to tell by looking at it what the timing is on the piece. You'll know if they wrote it too long or too short. Mm-hmm. But when you develop that inner stopwatch, you'll be able to say to them, okay, you want an eighth of a second off? On which word do you want me to take it off?" And Jackson Beck, was just a fabulous influence. So for the voiceover work, I came into it probably about 25 years ago. And back when I first came in, I was too much about my stage voice, and I didn't know how to pull it back. And I wasn't getting many auditions or much work at the time. Then again, that big moment in my life when my first son, Max, passed away, that was a life-changing moment. And it changed my relationship with everything, including my voice, because I'd been raising a child 2 years with Abby. And when you're raising a child, you don't use the big voice all the time. Mm-hmm. talking to little ears. I used to sing lullabies and tell bedtime stories and make daddy sounds. That changed my approach to voice work, because when I was listening to old voices like Vincent Price and Orson Welles, those were from days when people listened to voices on big radio consoles, a speaker in a room with many people listening. Voiceovers today and audiobooks today are done to the earbud, to this little device.
Mm-hmm.
It's intimate. You're speaking almost directly to the brain, so you use less voice.
Yeah.
Especially when you've got a big voice like mine. So when I came back to audition again, I had a whole new approach, and that led to a variety of interesting accounts. I was the first, turn off Siri again. There we go. I was the first voiceover for the Central Intelligence Agency. After 9/11, they needed a voiceover for Bloomberg Radio when they were trying to find voices of people who could do a certain style of sound to get people to come in who spoke different languages, to help recruit people for the financials, to be able to break down where the terrorist money was coming from.
Oh.
So that was an entry. I became the voice of Little Caesars, which my idol Jackson Beck had been the voice of in the old days.
Cool.
I did the Transformers Creo, which was a movie trailer type spot. So I got to do things like, they came from another world. Some came to destroy us. Others came to protect us. The Transformers have never been built like this. Little Caesars, it was 8 crispy, crunchy, caramelized corners, so crispy that a team of astrophysicists shrunk themselves down to study it. and it was wonderfully fun, because these commercials were playing all over the place. But these were non-union spots. I was union on stage. I was Actors Equity.
Oh.
But I wasn't SAG-AFTRA.
Okay.
So doing non-union voiceover, you don't make the best money, and they get a lot of usage out of it. It's very much the Wild West.
Yeah.
But then a couple of years ago, 4 years ago, I booked Pillsbury. And Pillsbury was my first union account.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a wonderful thing. It was right when Donald Trump had been elected. And I looked at the spots and I realized the country had a lot of conflict going on. And these were spots that were designed to make people reconnect with their community by baking things for each other. And I recognized that's what it was for. And by reading it that way, I booked an 8-spot account, national spots, made more money doing that than I had in 3 to 5 years of Little Caesars. And I became a union voiceover actor.
Awesome.
And that's been great. The agent I had been with at that time, though, was primarily non-union.
Mm-hmm.
Now, fortunately, I am with one of the best union people in the world. I'm working with an agency, KMR, and they're just phenomenal to work with, the nicest, most creative people I've ever experienced in my life. My old agent was fabulous, too. She was a legend in the business, Ann Wright, and she had taken James Dean around when he first came to New York.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, she was a legend. I mean, she was just fabulous. Everybody worked with Ann at one time or another in their careers. Been very fortunate in the good people I've worked with.
Mm-hmm.
But the agents I'm working with now are union and union only, and I won't work non-union. And I'm doing audio books as well. I did a book last summer on the life of Rudyard Kipling. And what was amazing was biography of Kipling. I thought, why am I an American doing a biography of Rudyard Kipling, the great British poet? Turns out he didn't have a British accent. He had a New England accent.
Oh my gosh.
It's incredible. And he wrote most of the pieces that we associate with him in Vermont.
Oh,
okay. The Wolves in the Jungle Book are from Vermont. The poem If was written in Vermont. The book Kim, written in Vermont. Captain's Courageous was his part of trying to write the great American novel.
Uh-huh.
He loved America more than any place else. He and Teddy Roosevelt and Mark Twain were friends.
Wow.
To the point where Teddy Roosevelt even helped get him a post office put near where he was in Vermont to collect his fan mail, so he didn't have to go as far.
Yeah, and I've spent a lot of time in Vermont, and there's some towns there that are the size of a postage stamp. So yeah, I get it.
And I love doing audiobooks now, particularly nonfiction, because when you record a nonfiction book, you become an expert on a topic for dinner conversation. And what's interesting for me is that the voiceover world is now completely changed with coronavirus.
Mm-hmm.
And a wonderful friend of mine, a producer with Hachette Publishers, called me up as soon as this started and said, "We need to turn your closet into a recording booth." Now, I didn't have a closet I could do it with, so we ordered me a sound booth from Spain.
Yep, you told me about that.
It's called Studio Bricks. And right now I have a room within a room in my apartment in Manhattan. And it's set up as a professional recording studio, and all of my auditions go out from there, and I can do for broadcast. And when you do audiobooks now, you have a Skype meeting on one iPad so they can direct you, and they take control of your computer to record all of the recording, and then at the end you just upload the files.
Oh my Lord. That's just so much easier than it used to be. Really.
It's amazing because I can now record from home at the same level that I could in a studio in the city, because we have not opened up the studios yet even.
No. Well, and think about it. Studio time is so expensive. And if you don't own a studio and you're renting that space to do something, it's just ridiculously expensive. And I get it. I understand why. But, this is, I think this is a way to sort of level the playing field a little bit in some ways, too, for people, to be able to do this work without having to lay out all of that money to go to a studio.
Well, except the client pays for the studio.
That's true. Yeah.
So the microphone and the booth together, everything cost me about $15,000. That's a lot of capital to lay out for most people.
Yeah, but you'll get it back.
Well, I will get it back in time, but I really look forward especially to going back to the studios to work, because my engineers, and the producers and the receptionists, all the people who go into the team of making a great voiceover, it's like working in the theater. I could stream a show from my desk and do it onto your stage, and you could stream it for your people.
Yep.
It's not the same as working with people like Amanda. Amanda is phenomenal to work with. And I want people like Amanda to work with. And we want to keep those jobs running as well. Economies only work when there's lots of jobs going.
It's really interesting that you said that. Is I was having a conversation with a young agent today, someone who actually went to APAP for the first time in January of this year and is really early in his career as an agent. And one of the groups that he represents is a string quartet. And very interestingly enough, the string quartet has been very resistant to doing any kind of live streaming because they can't play together, and their interaction with each other is so important. And what they proposed to him, which I found really fascinating, was that, hey, we want to do an educational outreach program virtually where we will show a videotape of us all performing live so you can see what it's like, and then we will show you the other way so we can explain why it doesn't work for us to not be able to have physical interaction with each other. And I thought, well, that's a really interesting thing for young musicians, particularly college age musicians who want to have a career, to be able to kind of see the importance of that interaction on stage. Not to say that virtual stuff is bad, because I think it's wonderful that there is great virtual content out there. But I think that was a really entertaining approach for them to say, look, we want to keep ourselves out there, but we just can't do what we do. We can't do it without.
You've just hit something. When this started, the big question that came out was, how do we do our shows? And we had tons of artists putting out free content online.
Yeah.
Streaming from their living rooms, most of them not knowing to plug in the Ethernet cable. And
which we both did.
And Amanda and Jody are very proud of us.
Yeah.
There was a lot of content very quickly. People missed what was needed. Here's my feeling on this. If I'm going to preach evangelically for the arts on what I feel, how this needs to go forward, I'm going to testify now.
Okay.
National Theater Live and things like that, where there are pre-recorded shows of plays where we see another audience watching a show, those for me are Pornhub for the arts. We are watching somebody else's experience.
Yeah.
We are not part of the breadth of making that happen. Now, during that time, I have had everything I ever wanted to see on National Theater Live, just about, except for Present Laughter, come up available for me to watch.
Yeah.
Up on YouTube. Now, I haven't watched them on YouTube in real time.
Me either.
What I have watched, though, is places like the Shaw Festival, or what you've been doing here, where it's live. It may not be as technically full stage, but there are comments on the side, and we're interacting with other people as I turn off Siri again. And I get to say, for example, with the Shaw Festival for a cabaret night, I saw my friends, the Van Gorders, one night, logging in with me. And I said, Bill, Esther, so good to see you. How did we get seats so close? Esther, I love your hat. And we started bantering in the feed. That was real time. I stayed on for the whole thing. Nobody, I believe, goes to YouTube or to FaceTime Live for entertainment. I believe we come to these things for human connection, to share an ephemeral experience together, knowing that our questions and our input make a difference.
Yeah.
And that to me is the bottom line. So I've been asked to put together shows for student matinees and for evening performances for some of our presenter colleagues for this fall. For my student matinees, I'm going to show some video clips of the show. Let's say like the Cask of Amontillado, which is beautifully staged and filmed by one of our presenter colleagues a couple of years ago.
Yep.
Then I'm going to do other sections of the show live right here. I'll use virtual backgrounds. And I will let the audience vote for which pieces I do. Do you want to hear Telltale Heart or Cask of Amontillado? Do you want to hear Annabelle Lee? Do you want to hear The Raven? Do you want me to do something I haven't done for years? Bottom line is, I can bring it up on screen, the text. It doesn't have to be memorized for this one. And I could be doing it improvised, live, right from the screen.
Which is much more interesting to me as not just as a presenter, but just as an audience member. That is interesting to me because it's live. That's the point.
And I can empower different people in the feed with certain things. I could give somebody a red ball, which they could throw up on the screen at any time, which would cause me to stop the piece and just be done with it for the evening. Give somebody the chance to detonate a performance. I can give somebody else a green ball, which when they throw it down, at that moment, I'm going to change directions and characterizations for whatever I'm doing into a brand new direction. And before that, we would have set up 3 to 5 different ways or approaches I could traditionally take in approaching this performance piece. But the audience might have a chance now to just push a button and change the direction I'm going with that performance.
That's cool.
And we're playing with different ways to create involvement for them.
Yeah.
Because they need that relevance. They need to know they're showing up makes the difference.
Yep.
And in this kind of format, it's going to be shorter. It will be under an hour plus some Q&A time probably. But it won't be the 2-hour show because nobody should sit in front of a screen for 2 hours.
No, it's way too long.
We're going to do shorter pieces. And I'm developing a lot of residency work where I'm going to be coming in as Director of Imagination is my title, working with professors and with students at colleges and high schools and grade schools and junior highs, where I can open up text where the teachers can apply to the Arts Center and say, we're working on these stories or this Shakespeare play with the students. And we'd like to have Joshua open up the text for them to explain to them why he gives a darn about it, why I'm passionate about it, why I believe it's worth their time to engage with this text and wrestle with it, and why I find value in wrestling with it and a thrill in it.
Yeah.
Because if they don't have a reason to connect to it, why should they?
Yeah.
But if I can be the guy who opens the key, turns the key and opens the lock for them, and the door opens and they get the value, that makes my day. I think the best fan letter I ever got, Tommy, in my whole career, I was performing down in Orlando at Valencia Community College. I had been brought in not to do my show, but to do a lunchtime conversation that I had done at a conference. They wanted done as a lecture. I've been talking at lunch about images of women in Gothic horror and how certain conservative types use those tropes to subjugate women today. About how the same tropes in Frankenstein and Dracula that were used to subjugate women in those times are used in this time as well. How some things haven't changed when they should have. So Victor booked that lunchtime conversation as a lecture. The lecture ran 45 minutes. The post-show conversation ran 2 hours.
Of course
We had lots of young white men who were very much up in arms about these accusations that I was making. At the end of it, the teachers were thrilled. The students were energized. Victor and I had a great lunch. I flew home and I got an email from a student that said, before your lecture, I thought that Frankenstein and Dracula were just 2 hokey movies. After hearing your lecture, I went to the library. I checked out both books and I made a weekend of them. And I still get goosebumps to this day for that.
That's awesome. That's just
Yeah.
awesome.
If that gets people, if you can actually get people to open up a book, if after seeing a play, people go and they expand themselves by reaching for something that was referred to in the story. My son, after seeing The Inheritance, wanted to read the E.M. Forster novel that it was based on.
Mm-hmm.
And he wanted the script for The Inheritance. When we take him to plays and he asks for another book or something that was referred to in the piece, I know we've hit the right button.
Yep.
And what we do, you and I together, is about making pennies drop for people. And for people who don't know that phrase, when I was 18 years old, I was living in London in an old actor's flat with this old actor named Bobby Bernard. He was also a magician. And I was studying mime there. And when I came back with my body aching from the efforts of the day, I would have to run the bath, but I would have to put in a 50 pence piece.
Yep.
Into the coin slot for the gas meter, turn it. And when the penny dropped in, it engaged the gas and ignited the flame to heat the hot water. So when the penny drops, it means the light goes on.
Yep.
And what we are really trying to do as artists, I feel, and presenters of the arts, I feel there's artistry in what you do in the presenting of it. What we do together is we try to make the pennies drop.
Yep.
And turn the pilot light on for people.
So that's a great place for us to sort of bring our conversation to an end, because we are just about out of time. But I think that's a great thought to sort of conclude on. So thank you so much, Joshua, for taking so much time to talk to me tonight. And I know that people have been commenting that they're getting a lot out of this. And I'm excited that this is available for people to watch afterwards if they weren't able to see it tonight. So in just a minute, I'm going to take you out of the stream to conclude everything, but stick around and we'll chat a little bit afterwards.
I want to thank you, Tommy, for having me. Anyone who is listening tonight or who listens later on in playback, thank you for tuning in to Moraine Valley Community College. I feel that what Tommy and the college do together are a phenomenal value for the community. There's something really incredible about having an art center, about creating opportunities for people to come together to create an ephemeral experience, things that wouldn't happen if we didn't all come together. So thank you for supporting the Art Center in the past, and we look forward to seeing you there live again in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Joshua. So I'll talk to you again in a couple of minutes. So thank you again, everybody, for joining us tonight. I'm thrilled that so many of you are regular attendees. I'm seeing a lot of names that I recognize. So thank you all. And I want to say a special thank you to two of the people who are backstage right now that you can't see, Amanda Hansen and Jody Marneris, who are both helping us out tonight behind the scenes again. So thank you both to Jody and Amanda for all your help. Thanks all of you for joining me. Next week, I'm excited. And Nick, I see you in the stream right now. My guest next week is the director of our Moraine Chorale and Chamber Singers, Nick Thomas. The Chorale and Chamber Singers performances always sell out. They are the most popular shows that happen on our stage at Moraine Valley for very good reason, because Nick is an awesome conductor and musician, and he's put together some fabulous choirs with an orchestra. So I decided that I'm looking at artists who have been on our stage and have been beloved on our stage in the past 2 or 3 years, and I'm like, wait, I gotta have Nick. So Nick will be on next week. So I don't know if he's going to wear any of his fun hats or not. We'll see if that happens. But any of you who've ever been to one of his concerts knows it's all about the hats. So thanks, Nick. I'll see you next week. And thank you, everybody, again. Please share the link with people. This video will be up on YouTube, and you can go back and watch it or any of the previous interviews anytime on YouTube, on our YouTube channel. So I want to say thank you to everyone again. And with that, I am going to sign off and let everybody get on with their evening. Thanks, and I'll see you all next week.